Hello and welcome back, Bob Marley. Apologies, and I guess welcome back for myself because I am indeed back. Again, trying to stick to the schedule that I set out for myself. So far, so good. The sleep is holding up more or less. I actually got pretty awful night's sleep last night, but I powered through. I went to the gym. I actually had a pretty good workout, and I went for a run, and thankfully, it more or less like energized me, and I have enough residual energy to like prepare a stream, and well, actually stream content. And I also, I guess, hit the bullet in terms of, I've been saying I'm going to get a tablet. I want to start like, drawing things out, and hopefully that allows me to explain some things better, or get some concepts across better, but that remains to be seen. But yeah, I bought a tablet and I should be going to pick it up in the next couple of days at the store. So hopefully starting, if all goes according to plan, starting like next week, I'll be able to use it with some effectiveness, but there's going to be, I'm sure, some growing pains or, learning how to actually effectively incorporate it, maybe if at all. But there are, let's say, some papers that, I've wanted to cover, but I've not covered them just because, like, I don't think I can explain them properly in just words, or rather, I don't think I can get the ideas and concepts across with just words alone effectively. And that I think some things require pretty much, yeah, drawing figures and like trying to like, map or flesh things out. But we'll see. I'm excited to at least try it out. Hopefully it actually like works and actually like connect it, actually get it on the screen. But yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains, as with anything. Just even whatever, even now, streaming still some glitches to work, or always trying to like optimize better, slowly but surely. But yeah, pretty much on today's stream, mostly just like some smaller stories. We might go deeper into one particular paper, actually mostly about climate, or rather a paper about climate change, or rather wildfires and its association or not with climate change, and trying to answer the question: are wildfires, being made worse, or being caused by climate change? And it seems like there was a paper published today. I haven't gone through it at all, so it'll be a first reading for me. And at least based off of what I've seen, like from the data, it seems like a computational modeling paper, which I'm definitely not equipped to like dissect. So probably just gonna like try to extract some highlights, or just try to understand it as best I can. But the rest is mostly just like smaller stories that are kind of like scattered all over the place. But one of them, or some of them, are in the stream title that I guess are probably the more noteworthy. Potential, at least in development, a blood test for Parkinson's. And like, yeah, as sort of, as mentioned in the stream title, a bionic pancreas. Which that's just like a fancy terminology for like, basically an insulin pump. Although the pancreas like does more than that. But these have been on the market, I think, for a while. But there are further optimizations and further improvement with the technology. I have no doubt they'll just get better and better, and smaller and smaller, as pretty much like just any technology does. So where do I want to start? Oh yes, I actually do know. Getting right into it, and I'm sort of like thinking out loud. Maybe I'll just spend like, I don't know, 2.5 hours, covering the smaller stories, and then I might spend like the last half hour for 45 minutes gaming, or entertaining the idea of incorporating some casual gaming streams, either like whatever, maybe this one or future ones. And like, again, this is going to be like really old school gaming, like literal original, like Tetris and like Dr. Mario. You might see me struggle or perform poorly or well, remains to be seen. But starting off with sort of, on a different topic, but sort of in the health, fitness, wellness, research, which I obviously follow because I try to take my health seriously, and I take fitness seriously as well. And I was at least making an attempt to incorporate things recommended by the research, or at least things in the research that demonstrate benefits that are not too difficult to implement, or I can actually afford to implement them. And like for the past few years, maybe more than that, like past 5 and 10 years, this issue of like blue light, on that like blue light or blue light exposure is like ruining people's sleep, or inducing eye strain. And this is published a little over a week ago. Pretty much like seems like a systematic review of the literature. Well, specifically a Cochrane database of systematic reviews. It's generally like one of the arguably gold standard, but generally considered like really high quality review of the research. And no surprise, it seems like the evidence is like pretty mixed, or like not really any strong recommendation to like limit your exposure to blue light. So study questions if blue light blocking glasses really work. Despite claims by their makers, Blue light glasses probably don't reduce eye strain for people who spend a lot of time looking at computer screens or their phones, a new study says. The glasses probably don't improve wearers' sleep habits either, according to this study, which was published this week. And I think, this is just taken off, and, it just, I guess when some of the earlier research came out, it was just, granted as true. A couple of studies seem to, point to this, or suspect this, and then, I think, many people, or even, many companies, just took it and ran with it. I think even now, the smartphone that I use now, my Samsung Galaxy S20, I think has a supposed blue light filter, or the option to turn off blue light. So it says. I don't know if I actually believe it or not, but it seems like the option is there. And I think the previous model of my phone also had that as well. Yeah, exactly. It's all the rage, which I'm even myself, I haven't done any deep dive into the research. I mostly go off of reviews and what some of the experts recommend, where it's I mean, I'll turn it off on my phone just because it doesn't affect anything. Whatever, might as well have it off if there's any risk of it affecting me. But I'm not gonna go out of my way yet to buy any glasses, unless just yourself, Bob Marley. If someone happens to give me a pair of blue light filtering glasses, and I can actually find some way to incorporate them into my life, and I might give them a try. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so funny / sad, that many people take their health cues or health information just by following what athletes do, or professional athletes, or elite competitive athletes, under the assumption that they know what they're doing, which no offense to them. In my experience, they just don't really know what they're doing. I think a great example is Michael Phelps, and the whole cupping thing, where there was that picture one time of him having a bunch of circular markings on his back, basically bruises as a result of the cupping, and then people just, well, since Michael Phelps does it, well, then it must be good for everybody, and it must be beneficial, even though based off of what I've seen in the research, and I've done a little bit of a deep dive on it, even though there's not really any good research out there, I would never recommend, or even I would never let anybody do that to me. Really bizarre practice, where I just don't think it's a really good idea to get any sort of health advice, or follow what the athletes do, just because very often also the athletes are just following what their coaches or their trainers say. Then coaches and trainers, in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, which might be nothing, they're a mixed bag. In my experience, many coaches and trainers, they just go by tradition. It's just word of mouth passed down, and since this trainer trained them, they go with that, and then it's just it's pretty much just knowledge transmitted from one generation to the next, of trainers and coaches, with no one really doing their due diligence, or until someone actually comes along and does the due diligence and actually starts making actual recommendations grounded in research. Blue light glasses are usually marketed as being able to filter out the potentially harmful effects of blue light from screens, such as eye strain, dry eye, and sleep problems. Interest in blue light glasses increased during the COVID-19 pandemic as more people stayed home and looked at their computers and phones. They're often prescribed by optometrists. The study, published in the Cochrane database of systematic reviews on Thursday, looked at data collected from 17 clinical trials in 6 countries that recruited 619 people. We found there may be no short-term advantages with using blue light filtering spectacle lenses to reduce visual fatigue associated with computer use. Compared to non-blue light filtering lenses, senior author Laura Downey, PhD and Associate Professor of Optometry and Vision Sciences at the University of Melbourne in Victoria, said in a statement. It is also currently unclear whether these lenses affect vision quality or sleep-related outcomes, and no conclusions could be drawn about any potential effects on retinal health in the longer term. People should be aware of these findings when deciding whether to purchase these spectacles. Researchers noted that one reason the glasses don't help is that the amount of blue light received from computer screens and other artificial sources is only about 1,000th of what people get from natural daylight. On top of that, blue light lenses usually filter out only about 10 to 25% of blue light, right? That's why it's like, there's two separate things. There's multiple concepts of like, yeah, the recommendation may actually be good, okay, but then like, what is the technology to actually like filter it out? Is it actually doing what it says it's supposed to be doing? Where it's like, yeah, my phone has that option, and like whatever, I turned it on, or rather, I turn off the blue light. But do I have actually any faith? I just kind of operate under the assumption that like, yeah, it's probably not doing really much of anything. And same thing. Oh, thank you so much for the lurk, Witchy. Super appreciate it. Hope you're doing well. But yeah, so, and I think there's parallels to draw with, research that I've covered before about, supplementation. And like the supplement market is like highly unregulated. And you really can't trust, like, literally based off of the research, you can't trust the labeling on these supplements and what they advertise themselves as, where it's like what they say is in the bottle may literally not be in the bottle, or you may literally be getting like totally something else, and that something else may be actually like prohibited or banned. I think the same thing holds true. I think there's some parallels. Like, I'm just suspicious of even like the blue light glasses, and like, have they been tested? How do they actually know, or like what method of testing are they using? Or like, how are they showing that it's blocking out these wavelengths of light? There are actual ways to do that. Like, there are many filters that exist. We actually use these things all the time in science and research. But yeah, I'm more or less like, oh, maybe I'm too skeptical and too cynical. I am always skeptical of any of the claims that manufacturers make. Well, so for creatine, you're almost certainly fine, just because, like, from a manufacturing perspective, okay, these days, or it's been the case for a while, like, creatine is, like, dirt cheap to manufacture. And so for them to, like, supplement it, like, unless it's, like, a really, like, struggling company, like, they're, like, literally going to replace it with, like, flour or something that you might not notice. There's like, no real, I would say, monetary incentive to, like, replace the creatine. Just because, it's dirt cheap now to manufacture, like, tons. And we generally have good idea of, like, at least people these days, depending on the brand of creatine, but more or less people, like, know what it looks like. And also, you should know how it should behave, as in, like, creatine doesn't dissolve in water. Like, if you've ever tried to, like, dissolve creatine in water, or like even like juice, any aqueous solution, you notice it doesn't dissolve. It's like sand. And that's not, like, unique per se. Like, many substances and powders do that. But let's just say, they have to, like, come up with two things of, like, something that's cheaper than creatine, and then also something that will behave like creatine. In terms of, like, you can also taste it as well. Like, creatine does, like, taste like something. No, that's a property of creatine. It is hydrophobic. Which, if I had my tablet on me, I would expand on what that means. But think of it as the difference between, like, well, it's not not really the wrong terminology, but, like, yeah, it's not ionic, so to speak. So it's not going to dissolve like salt, like table salt. It's just going to, like, if you, like, no matter how much you stir it, you just let it sit there for a couple of minutes, and you see it all just like falls to the bottom of the glass. And like that's how creatine should behave. Like if you ever buy something, if you ever buy creatine and you start mixing it and it dissolves, like that, yeah, that's definitely not creatine, unless this is some like really proprietary creatine that I've never heard about. But like no matter what creatine that you buy that I know of that's present on the market, although also any company marketing themselves as like fancier creatine or like more effective creatine, I wouldn't buy that either. Like creatine monohydrate, like your standard generic thing that's been around, you know, for like whatever 50 years. So like yeah, just like go with that. So it's like a company would have to like come up with like a white powder that's, you know, cheaper than creatine, that behaves like creatine, and that, you know, tastes like creatine. Of like there's a little bit of a taste to create, you know, it's a little bit chalky. I don't recommend. It's not a good taste. And so it's like, yeah, it's possible, but it's really hard to imagine that a company would be like that dirt cheap, that they would like go to that such great lengths, because it's not like super easy. You know, I can think of a couple of things that will sort of like fit some of the criteria of like, yeah, it's a white powder, not going to dissolve, probably a little bit cheaper than creatine, but like you're like, yeah, creatine is already like, you can buy like kilograms of this stuff for like, you know, $20, $30, $40 of like, you know, a 6-month supply. So it like, yeah, just doesn't make any sense. It'd have to be like a really shady company, and I think they would probably be exposed pretty quickly, as opposed to, you know, the other fancier supplements, okay, like the ones like more specific that are, let's say, you know, fat burners, and that, you know, market themselves as like, you know, promoting whatever muscle protein synthesis, you know, strength gains, etc., etc. You know, marketing themselves as, you know, anabolic. Like, you know, they're saying that they're a substance, and a specific substance. Now, whether that substance actually has the properties that they say it does, or, you know, has the ability to do what it says it does, different story. But now they have to come up with something that, you know, pretty much, well, yeah, like you can put nothing in there, which like that is literally what happens. But most people would hopefully clue in that they're, you know, not getting any real benefits. But that's also one of the reasons why, like when I showed that research, some of those products had like actual banned substances, prohibited substances. I can't remember what they were. But I think, I suspect that, you know, some of the banned substances were like, you know, in sort of that category of like actual anabolic substances, so that, you know, the people taking the supplement are actually like getting the benefits. They just don't know that it's coming from a banned substance, as opposed to, you know, what is supposed to be bottled. So all that to say, like, you're like, I also buy like pretty cheap creatine, and I buy it in bulk. And like, you know, I haven't like quality tested it, but, you know, it doesn't dissolve. It looks like creatine. You know, it tastes like creatine. Well, it tastes as, you know, other creatine supplements that I bought taste. So unless I've been duped like multiple times, and they're all using the same thing to dupe me, you know, I'm pretty confident that, yeah, what I have is creatine. And like, yeah, just from a monetary perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Since again, like, there's so many brands of creatine on the market. I've had to bring that more. Okay, yeah, so that's like, that is a matter of like how they grind it. Of like, some will be just like, yeah, more further refined. I thought you were referring to sort of the dissolve in water aspect. But like, yeah, some of them will be like crystals, as you say, sort of like salts or sugar. But the other ones, like, yeah, will be like flour. It's sort of like the difference. It's a marketing gimmick, really. But it's like the aspect of like whether it's micronized or not. But that's just like another, gimmick marketing thing of like, oh, we can call ourselves micronized creatine, which like there's no benefit to that whatsoever. But people just like, scientific sounding words. And yeah, if none of your creatine has dissolved, like that's a pretty good indication. And yeah, if you can get away with not taking supplements, uh, oh, Bill, welcome. Thanks so much for passing by. Okay, fine. I will respect it, especially since you're a mod. But if you want to shout yourself out, by all means, go for it. Yeah, I am doing well. I hope you're doing well also. But yeah, if you can get away with not taking supplements, like, great. That would just be my overall general recommendation. Hey, as long as you all enjoyed everything consensually, then all the more power to you. Continue shouting her out. Where it's like, I take supplements, but like, and totally supplements that are that are definitely not necessary for me or my functioning. As I mentioned, I take HMB, and like, whether I'm actually getting any benefits from that, I actually have no idea. I haven't ran any experiments. But my overall guiding principle for supplements, it's like, I'm mostly just concerned with safety. Is this supplement going to hurt me? And is there any potential for benefits? And what exactly are those potential benefits? And like with HMB, the safety profile, like there's like literally no safety concerns like whatsoever. Unless, I don't know, I really kilograms and kilograms of the stuff in like a small window. But like, yeah, there's potential benefits that I'm receiving, but I don't actually know if I'm receiving them in terms of like, slightly better recovery, maybe some greater strength gains, but it's probably marginal at best. An excellent question. If you're talking specifically about like anabolic steroids, like testosterone replacement therapy, actual anabolic steroids, in my opinion, I would say no, unless it's like really under the supervision of like a medical doctor that's like monitoring your levels, and that's like, trying to replace your actual endogenous testosterone production, if in fact you're deficient. But yeah, as a bodybuilder, yeah, since you specified that, pretty much I would say like, no, there's no healthy way to take anabolic steroids as a well. First of all, I think bodybuilding is inherently unhealthy, personally, and I think the data back me up in terms of just like the number of bodybuilders that they randomly pass away from heart issues or whatever. Not to make light of the situation, but just as I was saying earlier, people shouldn't take their health advice or fitness advice from professional athletes or even elite level competitive athletes. I don't think anybody should be taking health or fitness advice from a bodybuilder, personally. Maybe some advice on like form and technique about exercises. But like, yeah, any health claims, I think are like pretty suspect. But there are other sort of quote unquote steroids, or like, steroid adjacent substances that you can take that may be safer, that that are being developed for actual therapeutic purposes for actual diseases and conditions. These are sort of like in the SARMs categories. Yeah, selective androgen receptor modulators, which is basically just another way of saying, basically, you can consider them as steroids light, so to speak. Of like, this is science's attempt at like trying to retain the benefits, the anabolic benefits of steroids, while trying to, uh, decrease the chances of any sort of negative health effects. Uh, and like based off of some of the clinical trials, or the preliminary clinical trial data that I've seen on some of the SARMs in development, it looks pretty promising. But it's mostly promising in the category of like, hey, these people have actually, a pretty serious condition, or very often a serious condition, like cancer, for example. Of like, these are cancer patients going through chemotherapy, and they have issues with retaining their maintaining their body weight and retaining their musculature, and so they're pretty much, as an attempt to like help prevent any sort of like muscle loss or muscle atrophy, they're like trying out these anabolic substances, these designer customized anabolic substances, and so far it seems like the preliminary data that I've seen are pretty promising, but there still appears to be some sort of health risk, but it seems to be like much reduced. But they're also like, they don't appear to be as anabolic as actual steroids so far. But yeah, all that to say, like, I personally would never recommend taking anabolic steroids unless like your doctor recommends it and your doctor supervises. Do do do. So, elite. If you're talking about like elite, I would suspect probably like at least 30%, if not even closer to like 40, 50. Well, it's funny. I just actually finished reading, or rather finished listening to Outlive by Peter Attia. Which, overall pretty good. I think he gets some... I have some mild disagreements with some of his claims. Or rather, I think he has some biases, but we all do, myself included. But overall, I'd give this a good rating. I'd recommend... I'd overall recommend listening or getting a copy of it, whatnot. Although, after listening to it, nothing really in my life is going to change. Spoiler alert, he emphasizes exercise a lot, not just strength training. He recommends cardiovascular exercise and, zone 2 cardio, which I've already been doing. And so I'm just going to, continue doing that, because I was already confident that that was beneficial for me. And he also recommends working on your mobility and flexibility, which I've already been doing that. I'm just going to continue doing that. And then actually, his last chapter, the last chapter in the book, if I remember correctly, his last chapter, which he says is like, this is the most important component, kind of like the foundation of it all, is the mental health aspect of like, as he pretty much, so he shares some of his personal experiences with, let's say, mental health challenges or struggles, and things that he's had to overcome in the mental health and psychological domain. And he's transparent about the fact that this is something that he overlooked for the longest time, and that he wished he had taken it seriously earlier. He mentioned that he pretty much like had to like kind of like catch up, so to speak. Like, this was neglected so long that like, it reached a breaking point that he now had to like really make it an intense effort. And it seems like he devoted a lot of time and money to address his mental health challenges, where I don't think many people in the world, unless you're ultra wealthy, has the ability to like hire like 2 therapists that probably charge like $300 an hour, and like see them twice a week, and then go on to like retreats for weeks or months at a time, that probably cost like thousands of dollars. So like, yeah, it's great that he appears, at least from what he says, he seems that he's in a much better place. and that now he has, his own, he's incorporated, certain routines and aspects to, maintain, a healthy psychological state, just as you need to invest in your physical health. And like you need to do that routinely in terms of like routinely going to the gym, routinely trying to follow, in the ballpark of a healthy diet. Same thing holds true with the mental health aspect of like going to the gym as a practice for, your physical body. Well, there are certain mental health practices that, people might want to entertain incorporating to, invest in your mental health as like the foundation for other things. So I'm glad he emphasizes that, and that is like literally the last chapter, and I think it's the longest chapter. I'm only going by length because obviously it's an audiobook, but I think every other chapter was like an hour and a half, and the last chapter about mental health was like, I think, on the order of 2 hours. Either way, it's one of the longer ones. So I'm glad he emphasized that, because that's something that I definitely agree with, and that's also something that I knew, or rather I had strong suspicions before listening to this book, and so I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing. I've been practicing mindfulness meditation for the past 6 years, and so I'm just going to continue doing that. That's another practice he mentions. So he mentions that he has, I don't know if he's currently on medication, but he did mention, if I remember correctly, that like there were periods where he was on medication. I get the impression that he's no longer on medication, but he doesn't mention anything. He doesn't mention any specific pharmaceuticals. He mentions things to like manage, sleep and anxiety, and I think depression at one point. But I get the impression that I get is like he's no longer on anything, at least medication wise, for mental health. And also, so it is a good book, but it also highlights the fact, at least in my mind, to incorporate everything in this book, where, I'm not going to call him a liar. Like, if I'll grant that whatever he's saying is true, even for himself, like, hey, he says he does this, and these are all these things that he's doing, but everything that he's doing, like, it's a lot of time. Where he's like, yeah, this exercise routine for my mobility and flexibility, I do it 1 hour a day. And then like this strength routine, I do it like 1 hour a day. And then my cardio routine, I do it 1 hour a day. And then in my sauna, I do it like every other day. And then like, I don't know how he has time for anything else. But maybe he's just like, I don't know. But he also mentioned sleep as well, where it's like, yeah, that's another thing of like, this is something that he's overlooked for the longest time. And it's like, well, I don't know, he apparently has some like 4 or 5 hours per day, like workout routine and like mental health routine. And then he says he's getting, the recommended 7 to 8 hours. And so it's like, well, then I don't know, where's the time for like anything else? But hey, like if he can pull it off, but I think it, yeah, I think it also highlights just sort of, to incorporate all these things, I think it requires a certain amount of privilege. And like, I'm lucky that I can incorporate many of the things, but even many of the things that he says, like, is just like, I wish I was in that position, to, have a full mobility and flexibility routine, 1 hour per day. I would love that. But I don't have that. I have my workout routine, I have my cardio routine, and I work in mobility and flexibility where I can, but that's mostly like, that's more like an hour, or 2 hours like a week, as opposed to like a day. And then like, yeah, he mentions like very specific exercise to like, work out very specific muscle groups. Well, that will be the clickbait for the YouTube video, the upcoming YouTube video. Maybe I should start like book reviews on YouTube. But like overall, like, he definitely appears to be, in my opinion, my opinion, he appears to be one of the better sources for, medical and health advice. I think he shows his biases when it comes to diet, where, and maybe he knows better than me, totally possible. But I think, the evidence is pretty clear that, generally speaking, the more plant-based, the better. I'm not gonna make the prescription that everyone has to cut out all animal products and you're gonna anything beyond veganism is unhealthy. But I think the evidence is pretty robust that generally speaking, the more plants that you incorporate, the better. But he sort of in my opinion, toes the line, or doesn't really make any strong prescriptions, where he I think in the introduction to the chapter on diet, he says oh, I hate discussing diet because everyone's got whatever their ideology, etc, etc. And so he doesn't really make any real, my opinion, any real strong prescriptions, aside from whatever, saturated fat, just broad recommendations about carbohydrates, and fats and protein. He mostly just emphasizes that increasing your amount of protein is generally pretty good for longevity, and not only increasing strength but preserving strength as you age. People tend to lose muscle as they age, or have muscle atrophy as they age. Overall, pretty good. Based off of the 6K reviews, they give it 4.7. I would give it probably a 4, maybe a 3.8. But out of I guess the circle of podcast bros, of whatever Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman, Lex Friedman, and Peter Attia. I think Peter Attia is probably the best one out of those to get health and fitness advice. And then I would say Ritual is also up there, but I might be biased for sure. Yeah, totally on his website. Some is a little bit dicey, but I think it's good enough for a pretty good passing grade. And yeah, 30%, I think at least 30% of elite athletes are on some sort of performance enhancing, whether they know it or not. And I think 30% is an underestimation. So wrapping this up, where was I? Right. Researchers noted that one reason the glasses don't help is that the amount of blue light received from computer screens and other artificial sources is only about, I already read that, but our findings do not support the prescription of blue light filtering lenses to the general population, Downey said. Eye experts say people can cut down on eye strain by simply cutting down on the amount of time they look at screens, or by taking regular breaks. To improve sleep, stop looking at screens for a few hours before bedtime. And this is also another recommendation by Peter Attia. When it comes to, his issues, his recommendations about sleep, of sleep is super important, and basically the broad recommendations are the darker that you can make your environment for sleep, and he recommends that if you can't make your environment super dark, so dark to the point that you can't see your own hand in front of your face, then invest in one of those eye masks, which that might be something that I actually do. And limiting screen time before bed. The researchers noted limitations in their analysis. None of the studies investigated contrast sensitivity, color discrimination, discomfort glare, macular health, melatonin levels, or overall patient visual satisfaction. Also, the length of the different studies varied. In most studies of the use of blue light filtering glasses is needed, the researchers said. And I have the study that they're referring to, this Cochrane systematic review. I'm definitely not going to read that. Well, first of all, I don't have access to the full review. And Cochrane reviews, at least the full ones, they're generally like, dozens, if not like over 100 pages. Like they are quite thorough. But they usually have, I think, a plain language. Yeah, key message. Blue light filtering lenses may not reduce short-term eye strain associated with computer work, compared to non-blue light filtering lenses. Potential harmful effects were temporary and generally mild, and mostly thought to be related to the glasses more generally, rather than specifically the lenses themselves. There is a need for future research to provide evidence for the effects of blue light filtering lenses on multiple aspects of visual performance and sleep, including vision level, best corrected visual acuity, ability to detect differences in shading and patterns. Oh, Davi, welcome. Always great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Color discrimination, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, all that to say, it seems like, but Cochrane reviews are not perfect, but no review is. But it seems like, the recommendation, uh, or rather the paranoia around blue filtering, or filtering blue light, probably overblown. But hopefully, just more research is going to allow us to come to a more firm conclusion. I think the main message is, we probably don't need to be all that paranoid about blue light. And maybe at most, if you can limit your screen time before bed, that's probably just, bare minimum good recommendation. And even I don't do that. I'm not gonna lie. I use my phone up until bedtime, and that might be a part of the sleep issues that I have. Totally possible. Okay, so for one of the main topics, in my stream title, a blood test for Parkinson's disease. Measuring DNA damage in mitochondria could predict who will develop devastating brain disorder. Preliminary study. This is published just today, earlier today, and it is referring to a study. I was able to get it. It is this one, a blood-based marker of mitochondrial DNA damage in Parkinson's disease. And I'm not going to dissect this study today as much as I would want to. One, because I haven't read it in full yet. And two, based off of the data that I'm seeing, what I sort of understand from the paper, from a cursory reading, or surface level reading, or even just seeing this data, yeah, this is where I would like the access tablet, draw things out and really try to actually explain what it is that they're doing, if in fact I can understand. But hopefully, like I said, I have officially now purchased a tablet. I should have by this weekend. So hopefully next week I'll be able to incorporate that when covering papers like this. And there's a bunch of other biology and biochemistry papers that I've been wanting to cover, but haven't, because I have not had the ability to draw things. At least draw things out with dexterity. I can draw things out now in paint, but me drawing things with a mouse is probably more harmful than beneficial. So, Parkinson's disease, a brain disorder that gradually leads to difficulty moving, tremors, and usually dementia by the end, is often difficult to diagnose early in its years-long progression. That makes testing experimental treatments challenging and slows people from getting existing drugs, which can't stop the ongoing death of brain cells, but temporarily improve many of the resulting symptoms. Now, a study using rodents and tissue from diagnosed Parkinson's patients suggests DNA damage spotted in blood samples offers a simple way to diagnose the disease early. Which, I'm not an expert on Parkinson's disease. I probably know, some of the hypotheses out there in terms of the causes of Parkinson's. But at the end of the day, oh, let's just say you can put it under the category of sort of what I understand, a protein misfolding issue, so to speak. Or definitely there are proteins involved. But it seems like this might be one of the other hypotheses out there in terms of one of the causes of Parkinson, in terms of like maybe some sort of mitochondrial dysfunction, or maybe some issues with energy production, broadly speaking, since mitochondria are largely responsible for energy production in humans and pretty much mammals generally. And so if in fact that's the case, where this mitochondrial damage is somehow contributing or is one of the causative variables for Parkinson's, then it makes sense that you can detect the mitochondrial damage and presumably you can detect Parkinson's. So although the potential test needs to be validated in clinical studies, the detected DNA damage joins a flurry of other biomarkers recently identified for Parkinson's and adds to our ability to state confidently that an individual has Parkinson's disease or not, says neurodegeneration researcher Mark Cookson of the National Institute on Aging, whose grant-making arm helped fund the new work, published today in Science Translational Medicine. Yeah, this paper right here. A blood test based on the findings could also help patients go on existing treatments earlier and boost clinical trials evaluating new therapies, the study authors say. Which I don't know for sure, but I suspect, diagnosis or screening is one of the challenges. And I think it probably holds true that the earlier the detection, the better the outcomes. That it generally holds true for pretty much most other conditions. And I suspect that, once symptoms arise, or once someone notices that, they're symptomatic of something and they go seek, medical treatment, that might be late in the disease process, potentially. And so if you can just diagnose it by blood test, and you can diagnose it with, a high degree of sensitivity and specificity, then that will almost certainly improve outcomes over the long term. It's really exciting because it's something physicians could use to detect Parkinson's before the clinical symptoms emerge, right? Says neuroscientist Malu Tanzi of the University of Florida, who also was not involved with the research. Parkinson's occurs when the death of certain neurons in the brain causes levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine to drop, leading to muscle stiffness, balance problems, speech and cognitive problems, and other symptoms over time. The disorder, tied to both environmental and genetic factors, afflicts up to 1 million people in the United States. The new test is built on observations that Parkinson's often involves malfunctioning mitochondria, powerhouse organelles inside cells that have their own DNA. Several teams, including neuroscientist Laurie Sanders' group at the Duke University School of Medicine, have reported that brain tissue from some Parkinson's patients carries signs of mitochondrial DNA damage. Some studies have also found defective mitochondria in patients' blood cells, suggesting mitochondrial DNA damage in blood could be a surrogate for what's happening in the brain. And so, as they say, mitochondria, powerhouse organelles, inside cells, and they have their own DNA, and there are reasons for that. Largely, whatever evolutionary history reasons for that. But the mitochondria that you have, that is inherited maternally, or from your mother, as in you get your mitochondria from your mother. And many there are a host of other, mitochondrial diseases and conditions. And as they say, it seems like there's some sort of malfunctioning of mitochondria in Parkinson's. And so it doesn't seem like they're explicitly saying, this is what is causing it, but it sort of begs the question, what is causing malfunctioning? Or is this just, they say there's genetic factors, But like, yeah, what is the combination of genetic and environmental factors that is resulting in what looks to be malfunctioning mitochondria? Her lab and collaborators. Oh, and yeah, some studies have also found defective mitochondria in patients' blood cells. Oh yeah, I did read that. All right. Her lab and collaborators recently developed a novel assay that assesses the amount of damaged mitochondrial DNA in a blood sample. The test was able to distinguish several sets of up to about 50 people with Parkinson's disease from healthy control subjects. The researchers also found higher levels of mitochondrial DNA damage in the blood of a diagnosed Parkinson's patient who had been born with a rare mutated form of a gene called LRRK2 that raises the risk for the condition. Sanders' team had previously tied the mutation to mitochondrial DNA damage in brain tissue. Most intriguing, the test picked up this damage in people with the disease-promoting variant of LRRK2, but no symptoms. That suggests it could flag people before they develop serious disease, perhaps even in the more than 90% lacking the LRRK2 mutation or other Parkinson's-linked mutations, Sanders said. The assay could also help determine who may benefit from an experimental Parkinson's compound that targets LRRK2, cultured cells from Parkinson's patients, and neurons from rats with the disease, induced by a neurotoxin. Treatment with the compound reduced levels of mitochondrial DNA damage, Sanders' team reports. The compound is now in clinical testing, and Sanders suggests her team's assay could indicate whether it is helping patients. So far, the assay has only been retrospectively tested on stored blood samples. Researchers will need to prove it can accurately and sensitively detect Parkinson's early through a prospective trial. Researchers also need to better understand why blocking LRRK2 appears to reduce mitochondrial DNA damage, says. Understanding the mechanism involved is critical so we can properly understand what this promising biomarker is telling us about disease pathogenesis. So yeah, it seems like, you know, they can potentially screen for it, and you know, this might be able to allow for diagnosis, but it seems like even then it doesn't seem to be giving any more clues as to like what is actually going on. Of like, yeah, they have like this LRRK2 mutation, almost certainly causing some sort of, you know, malfunction or dysfunction. But the actual nature of the malfunction or dysfunction seems to be unknown, at least based off of this reading. And even then, it's like they have this potential therapeutic agent that blocks the LRRK2, that seems to reduce mitochondrial DNA damage. But then it's like, you know, why, like, what is the relationship between this LRRK2 and the mitochondrial DNA damage? Where it doesn't seem like they're able to link it, or they don't actually know, like, the mechanism, like, what's the connective issue between things. Which, like, yeah, that is not uncommon in the medical world. Where, like, very often we have treatments, and, you know, treatments that work, but we don't really know why they work. It's just like, well, it works, so just, like, go with it. And, like, one of the, I think, great examples are, like, corticosteroids or prednisone, which we sort of, like, covered yesterday with that patient who had the literal brainworm, and they started that patient on an anti-inflammatory, specifically prednisone. And, like, that is a potent anti-inflammatory, but if I remember correctly, don't really know, like, all of the mechanisms behind, like, what it does. Like, we know it reduces inflammation, and it reduces inflammation very effectively, but we don't actually know, like, what's going on, or, like, you know, what is the actual mechanism that allows it to reduce inflammation. The mitochondrial DNA test isn't the only candidate blood test for Parkinson's. Earlier this year, researchers reported that analyzing spinal fluid for a misfolded form of a neural protein called alpha-synuclein could have potentially diagnosed 88% of 545 current patients. So again, talking about misfolded protein. I'm like, yeah, I definitely know this protein, alpha-synuclein. Researchers are making progress on a blood test for the protein, which is known to build up in the brains of people with Parkinson's. But the mitochondrial DNA, and this is sort of what I was alluding to earlier in terms of like, so this might be one of the alternative hypotheses, or like, I don't know how it fits in to the picture of mitochondrial DNA damage. Like maybe this is just a bigger, another piece in a much larger puzzle. But like, yeah, this is more or less what I was referring to when I was talking about like, proteins and protein misfoldings, and that Parkinson's seems to be associated with some sort of like protein misfolding issue. But the mitochondrial DNA and alpha-synuclein tests are measuring slightly different things and might reflect different forms of Parkinson's disease. Right, yeah, more or less what I was saying. She envisions giving people suspected of having Parkinson's both tests. That could give us the power to really understand what's happening in this disease so that we can then treat it better. I'm like, yeah, like I said, I have the original study. I just want to see if I can sort of quickly out some of the things did. Mostly what their methods were, if they say them. Heroes and methods, DNA extraction. So this is basically their way of measuring mitochondrial DNA damage. Like, this is a proprietary way. I'm not going to dissect it now. Blood samples, healthy control cohorts. Okay. Seems like most the data is coming. Or yeah, their unique method, or their proprietary method for assessing mitochondrial damage. And then, so, on with that. And then the other thing, cover, I think is pretty cool, where I have this, again, this article, but I also have an original study, and maybe we can take a closer look at this, since it, I don't know for sure, but at least based off of what I gathered from a cursory reading, should not be super complicated. But like, yeah, a bionic pancreas. So, do-it-yourself medical devices, the people who built a bionic pancreas. 10 years ago, a tech-savvy group of people with type 1 diabetes decided to pursue a do-it-yourself approach to their own treatment. They knew that a fairly straightforward piece of software could make their lives much easier, but no companies were developing it quickly enough. What this software promised was freedom from having to constantly measure and control their blood glucose levels. In people without type 1 diabetes, when glucose levels rise, cells in the pancreas release insulin, a hormone that helps tissues to absorb that glucose. In type 1 diabetes, these cells are killed by the immune system, leaving people with the condition to manage their blood sugar by taking insulin. It is almost inhumane, says Shane O'Donnell, a medical sociologist at University of College Dublin, who, like everyone quoted in this article, lives with type 1 diabetes. You're constantly having to think about diabetes in order to survive. Members of the nascent do-it-yourself community were using the most sophisticated technology available: insulin pumps and wearable devices called constant glucose monitors. But they still had to read the monitor's data, forecast their diet and exercise, and then calculate the appropriate insulin dose. What they wanted was automation, an algorithm that would analyze glucose data and program the pump itself. Coalescing around this aim in 2013, the community debuted a hashtag, "We Are Not Waiting." So it seems like, they took matters into their own hands. Largely driven, or exclusively driven by an unmet need: patients. Then, in February 2015, Group member Dana Lewis shared the code for an algorithm that she and two collaborators had developed and tested. "We didn't set out to do anything big," says Lewis, now an independent researcher in Seattle, Washington, but soon people who downloaded and used the algorithm shared their personal experiences and gave feedback. When users suggested tweaks and potential improvements, others tried them and reported back. Katarina Braun, an endocrinologist at Charité Berlin University Medicine, estimates that around 30,000 people now use open source technology for automated insulin delivery. Some use Lewis and colleagues' original Open APS system, which requires a mini computer to control it, whereas others use either Android APS, which evolved from Lewis's system, or Loop, which are smartphone applications. The movement has continued to mature after years of relying on self-reported data. In the past year, two randomized controlled trials have shown the safety and effectiveness of open source systems. And this January, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted regulatory clearance to an aid system based on an open source algorithm for the first time. Today, however, the technology landscape for type 1 diabetes is much more crowded. The first commercial aid system was launched in 2017, and currently 5 companies sell such systems with more than 750,000 users. Is this the beginning of the end for the open source movement in diabetes care? Some diabetologists think so, but many advocates reject that idea, saying that the community is still pushing the technology in new directions that promise more personalization and automation than commercial versions currently provide. Sufyan Hussain, an endocrinologist at King's College London, says that he was initially skeptical about the do-it-yourself aid community, but when he started to engage with it in around 2016, he was shocked at how well engineered the solutions were in terms of the safety and understanding. In 2022, Hussain co-authored an international consensus statement signed by more than 40 medical and legal experts and backed by 9 diabetes charities, calling for healthcare professionals to support those wanting to use open source aid. Results from randomized trials have further elevated the status of do-it-yourself technology. A study published this year found that an open source and a commercial aid system both controlled glucose levels similarly well, and a September 2022 study demonstrated the efficacy of an algorithm that runs an artificial pancreas system on Android smartphones. I believe this one is the study that I have. Yeah, 2022, they said, September. New England Journal of Medicine. That one. Probably take a little bit of a closer look. By recruiting participants who were new to the technology, the study addressed long-standing criticisms that advocates had previously cherry-picked data from highly motivated tech-literate members. Despite their tens of thousands of users, many of whom have chosen not to use available commercial systems, do-it-yourself devices for type 1 diabetes remain relatively niche. O'Donnell says that a welcoming and supportive community guides people with limited technology skills through setting up systems. But most people with type 1 diabetes and most doctors haven't encountered these systems, says Aaron Kowalski, president and chief executive of JDRF, a nonprofit research organization in New York City that focuses on type 1 diabetes. The FDA's approval of the open source system, Tidepool Loop, could change things, says Kowalski. The algorithm underlying it was created in 2016 by people living with type 1 diabetes and was initially rolled out through online forums before a version of it was taken through FDA clearance by Tidepool, a nonprofit organization in Palo Alto, California. Tidepool's goal in getting Loop through regulation is to make it more accessible to a wider audience, says spokesperson Syra Khan Gallo. Downloading code and building an app on your phone is not for everyone, says, but the algorithm, that the novel features and technology should be available to anyone who is interested. Tidepool and others hoping to roll out open source algorithms face a big challenge. Their products do not stand alone. The algorithms require compatibility with continuous glucose monitors and pumps made by other companies, thereby demanding a cooperative relationship between manufacturers. Tidepool is yet to announce which device company it will collaborate with to launch Loop. Interoperability between different products and algorithms could shake up a marketplace in which individual manufacturers have usually developed proprietary exclusive software. This could have ramifications beyond type 1 diabetes treatment, affecting any computerized medical hardware that software developers might attempt to improve. Kowalski points to examples in other industries, such as aerospace, in which companies use engines made by others. They're plugging in different components from different manufacturers to get the best performance, he says. People with diabetes should have the opportunity to use the best tools that work the best for them. Several device manufacturers, however, told Nature that they are wary of relying on third parties to provide crucial pieces of a system. For instance, Tandem, a pump manufacturer in San Diego, California, says that if an algorithm runs on a smartphone app and not on the pump itself, bone damage or connectivity problems could be a risk to therapy. And Medtronic, a medical technology company in Watford, UK, has decided to prioritize designing their own complete system rather than interoperable components. Nonetheless, Tide Pool's regulatory approval will hopefully ease the way for future standalone algorithms seeking clearance, says Khan Gallo. She hopes that having more options will incentivize companies to make their devices cross-compatible. When and where algorithms have led, open source hardware might follow, says O'Donnell. A team at the University of Otago in New Zealand has run a successful early-stage clinical trial of an open-source insulin pump. The goal is to provide free-of-charge design plans to qualified manufacturers to build pumps for a fraction of the cost of current commercial ones. When asked whether the open-source community of users still has a part to play, Kowalski says the do-it-yourself community is always going to be there. I think they're the ultimate testing ground for what people want and need. Hussein agrees. Participants' lived experiences of type 1 diabetes constantly generate ideas for novel features, he says. But more importantly, the network of online forums and highly motivated members has created a rapid and powerful way to test algorithm function. Problematic updates are quickly weeded out, and beneficial innovations self-propagate and achieve widespread use in just months. Currently, Hussein says, the commercial systems don't have advanced features that the open source systems allow. Some of these features mean that certain open source systems come close to regulating blood sugar completely autonomously. Although commercial systems are advancing, none is as near to solving this important problem. They currently use hybrid algorithms that manage insulin dosing most of the time, but they require a lot of... For instance, users must program in meals to ensure that the devices deliver large corrective insulin doses. By contrast, many open source systems do not require meal announcements and come close to being a fully closed loop. Several advances in technology made this possible, says Lewis. The apps can analyze long-term changes in glucose control and insulin sensitivity resulting from, say, hormonal changes or illness. They do this by retrospectively comparing glucose levels with insulin doses over days or weeks to adjust upcoming dosing according to changes in insulin sensitivity. They can also deal with perturbations to blood glucose without knowing whether it was a meal, adrenaline, stress, excitement, whatever, it doesn't matter. Whether open source systems are better than commercial ones is a big it depends question, says Rehan Lal, an endocrinologist at Stanford University in California, and Tide Pool's chief medical advisor. Says that he has started more than 3,000 people on open source aid systems and uses one himself. What matters, Lal says, is that individuals can find what works best for them in terms of the control they gain or the effort they want to make. Some people might want to tailor their devices. Others might prefer the simplicity of a package from a commercial manufacturer. The do-it-yourself community and industry are not in opposition, says. He is delighted that a safety feature that she wrote and freely shared was incorporated into a commercial device. The open source community will stay relevant, she says, as long as it offers users choice. The vision of where I'd love to get to, whether it's commercial or do-it-yourself, is really about the person with diabetes and our safety, our quality of life. But yeah, it seems like, as mentioned, there was this unmet need for patients, and like they took matters into their own hands. And like it seems also like now that it's taken off, now actual companies seriously, and I guess cash in on that. And so let's try and take a closer look So this is, yeah, one of the open source automated insulin delivery. Published, yeah, 2022. So pretty much almost exactly a year ago, really. Okay, yeah. The use of automated insulin delivery systems that encompass an insulin delivery algorithm, insulin pump, and continuous glucose monitoring has been shown to improve glycemic control and reduce the care burden for patients with type 1 diabetes. Unlike, yeah, so this is type 1, broadly speaking, considered an insulin deficiency, as in, like, this is basically largely considered an autoimmune condition. So you have type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 2 generally regarded as, insulin sensitivity, or rather insulin resistance, as in type 2 diabetes. Like these individuals, they are producing insulin, but they are no longer responding to it. As in, like, for whatever reason, the insulin is there, but it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. As opposed to in type 1 diabetes, back in the day it was called juvenile diabetes because typically be diagnosed pretty early. But this is generally considered like an autoimmune condition where, the cells in the pancreas that produce the insulin, they are like actually being destroyed by the patient's. And so, like, the insulin is like totally, or rather, largely absent. You don't have the insulin producing cells. And so, they try to overcome that by providing, exogenous insulin. So insulin from the outside, instead of your body producing it, manufactured, and you inject it, or in this case, you have like an insulin pump that is like doing it automatically. A do-it-yourself aid system called OpenAPS was developed by patients with diabetes and was shared freely as an open source system in February 2015. Since that time, multiple open source aid systems have evolved, and despite a lack of regulatory approval, such systems have been adopted by approximately 2,500 patients with diabetes globally. Data now include the results of more than 55 million hours of real-world open source aid experience. Two widely used open source aid systems are Android APS, OpenAPS algorithm on an Android device, and Loop, a different algorithm on an iOS device, so essentially the Apple version. No surprise. In a single group study, investigators found that patients who used the Loop system had a higher percentage of time in range for target glucose control, with an increase in control from 67% at baseline to 73% at 6 months. However, this study was limited by a lack of comparative effectiveness and enrollment of patients who had a high percentage of time in the target range at baseline. The uptake of open source aid systems has a number of barriers beyond a lack of regulatory approval, including a lack of trial data regarding safety and efficacy, limited expertise with the system among healthcare professionals, and a perception that the use of aid systems is technically challenging. In the randomized controlled trial called CREATE, community-derived automated insulin delivery, we evaluated the efficacy and safety of an open-source aid system as compared with sensor-augmented insulin pump therapy in children and adults with type 1 diabetes. So, like, it seems like there was this patient need, and then, patients took matters into their own hands, and they developed this, open system, open source aid system. And, well, now they're essentially saying that, well, there's lack of evidence behind the effectiveness of these open source automated insulin delivery systems. And there's, other challenges in terms of, maybe the healthcare professional that you're interfacing with, like, not familiar with this open source software. And so it's like, whatever. It's like, a catch-22, so to speak. where, if uh, if an actual company had taken it upon themselves to like develop something, and then like go through the rigorous testing for that, well then that wouldn't be an issue. But since that never happened, like patients took it upon themselves to like hopefully with the intention, almost certainly to improve their lives and hopefully improve their insulin management. And now they're sort of like being criticized or saying like, well, we don't know how effective it is, or like maybe going so far as to saying, well, this shouldn't be used until it's been tested. But like well, a company could have done that. But now that this exists, and I sort of suspect, I don't actually know, but I suspect that since a company saw that there was a market for it, where it's like, oh, they're creating this open source automated insulin delivery system. Well, clearly patients want something. They're demanding something, and they're actually trying to meet their own demand. And so like almost certainly that would incentivize a private company. Well, okay, well we'll do it, and we might do it better, or we might develop it better, or actually go through the testing that is required to get it approved. But at least there's this, where medical doctors and researchers have taken it upon themselves to test open source one. The trial was conducted at 4 sites in New Zealand. Yeah, good clinical practice. Hardware. Yes. Trial designed by representatives, University of Otago. Okay. Eligible patients were between the ages of 7 and 7 years, so children to the elderly, had received a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes at least 1 year earlier, had at least 6 months of experience with insulin pump therapy, and had a mean glycated hemoglobin level of less than 10.5%. Patients in the 2 trial groups or their parents or guardians were invited to join separate closed online communities. Yeah, during a 4-week run-in phase, patients became familiar with the trial devices, functioning as sensor-augmented insulin pump therapy. Patients were then randomly assigned in a 1-to-1 ratio to the aid group or the control group, with the use of blocks of 4, 6, and 8 stratified according to age, trial site, and baseline glycated hemoglobin level. A 24-week trial followed, with the primary endpoint measured between days 155 and 168. All the patients attended 3 in-person visits. Those in the aid group had also 2 additional reviews by telephone at weeks 3 and 6. During visits and telephone reviews, patients were asked about adverse events and device issues, patient use, Dexcom alarm settings. In addition, staff members reviewed data using a unique URL provided by Nightscope. All the patients or their parents or guardians could alter settings between contacts, but staff members were instructed to avoid surveillance outside of scheduled reviews and did not receive automated alerts. This approach was designed to negate an effect on outcomes caused by additional scheduled contact with the trial team in the aid group. Yes. Here's the actual, or I guess the not open source automated insulin delivery system. The outcomes. What? Analysis. What are the overall findings? Where's the... here it is. In the CREATE trial, we found that patients who were using the open source aid system had 3 hours, 21 minutes more time in the target glucose range per day than those who were using sensor-augmented insulin therapy. Seems like the open source one formed the not, pretty much like the closed one. A between group difference of 14 percentage points. Patients in the age group had improved glycemic control while maintaining a low percentage of time during which the glucose level was less than 70 milligrams per deciliter. The improved glycemic control during aid therapy is consistent with findings in observational studies, are limited by a self-selected cohort of patients who have chosen to use an open-source aid system. The positive effect of aid therapy on glycemia in our trial was greatest overnight, a finding that was consistent with the results of evaluations of commercial aids. In the age group, adults had a higher percentage of time in the target range than children, possibly because of differences in glycemic variability. Likelihood of administration of an insulin bolus before a meal, activity level, and dietary. Even so, children still had the greatest improvement in the percentage of time in the target range between baseline and the end of the trial. Other studies have also shown that patients with the lowest baseline time in the target range gained the most from the use of AID, for automated insulin delivery. The absolute differences in the percentage of time in range between the trial groups are similar to between group differences for commercially available aid systems. Such between group differences are partly attributable to the decrease in the percentage of time in range in the control group after the run-in period, which we hypothesized was due to a waning awareness of being observed over time. Yeah, this is like, as they allude to, the Hawthorne effect of, like, kind of like just by virtue of being in a study and knowing that you're going to be observed, like, will alter your behavior. I guess probably like the classic example would be like, if you're enrolled in a diet study, and you know that your diet is going to be tracked, or you're going to have researchers asking you about your diet, well, then that will affect, at least for some amount of time, your behavior. Like, well, basically sort of like knowing that Big Brother is watching you. It's like, well, you will tend to, in the short term, like, make better choices. If you sort of know, or like you sort of think that someone's going to be holding you accountable, or like inquiring about your choices. Hardware malfunction rather than algorithm performance was the main burden on patients in the age group. Occlusions in the insulin infusion set were the main cause of hyperglycemia. The absence of diabetic ketoacidosis and severe hypoglycemia in the two groups was reassuring. One strength of our trial is that the patients were more representative of those with type 1 diabetes than the patients in many real-world studies. In addition, in our trial, the patients did not have experience with open-source aid, which suggests that a range of patients with type 1 diabetes can benefit from this. The majority of patients' contacts with trial staff members were for troubleshooting hardware issues, and the deficiencies of the devices in the two groups were similar. We observed that with appropriate training, healthcare professionals can provide technical and clinical support for open-source aid users. The trial also had a high level of patient retention, a lack of remote monitoring, which resembled real-world clinical practice, and broad inclusion criteria, which resulted in a population of diverse ages and ethnic backgrounds. Furthermore, the 6-month trial duration was suitably long to capture rare adverse events. Our trial also has certain limitations. Real-world support may differ from that provided in a trial. The control group did not have an automated system for predicting low glucose levels or suspending insulin administration, features that have been shown to reduce the incidence of hypoglycemia. The generalizability of our findings may be limited by the enrollment of patients with a relatively low glycated hemoglobin level at baseline, by the underrepresentation of patients with reduced economic resources, and by the increased familiarity with insulin pump therapy and continuous glucose monitoring among the patients at baseline. However, the trial patients were more diverse than those enrolled in previous studies that had been biased by patient selection of open-source aid. The effect size is partially due to a small decline in the percentage of time in the target range. The group has not been observed in other studies. Unscheduled contacts with trial staff members by telephone, email, or text message were not recorded. Measurement of glycated hemoglobin was not centralized and was performed on a point-of-care basis. Patients in the two groups used different insulin pumps, although other studies have compared aid with usual care. In addition, a variety of insulin pumps were used in the control group, although the stable time in the target range throughout the trial suggests that the factor had a minimal effect. So in children and adults with type 1 diabetes, the use of an open source aid system resulted in a significantly higher percentage of time in the target glucose range. The use of a sensor-augmented insulin pump at 24 weeks. So it seems like at least in this study, based off of their criteria, the open source in automated insulin delivery system outperformed I guess it was the iOS, the sort of like well, with the Apple one, I think Dexcom. Yeah, Dexcom. G6 continuous glucose monitoring, or CG. I believe like this is pretty standard, or like this is a popular continuous glucose monitoring device or pump. So pretty cool. And I think a pretty good demonstration of like the power of open source and communities. Well, in this case, like patients, actually coming together to address actual medical need. And then pretty much totally switching topics. So those are pretty much like the two main topics that I want to cover. The Parkinson's blood test, and that, as they say, essentially a bionic pancreas. But, it's basically a wearable device, arguably not a true implant. But on a totally separate topic, but this totally caught my attention. I'm very much a cat person, and I'm still like putting together, the stream devoted to, making the scientific case that, cats are better than dogs, even though I love both. But why do cats love tuna so much? Scientists may finally know. Study identifies taste receptors that give our feline friends a craving for meat, and one fish in particular. And I think there's also interesting research about catnip, and why do cats have this insane love for catnip, or why do they actually go crazy for catnip? And I'm probably going to cover that at some point. Apart from Garfield's legendary love of lasagna, perhaps no food is more associated with cats than tuna. The dish is a staple of everything from the New Yorker cartoons to Meow Mix jingles, and more than 6% of all wild-caught fish goes into cat food. Yet tuna, or any seafood for that matter, is an odd favorite for an animal that evolved in the desert. Now, researchers say they have found a biological explanation for this curious craving. In a study published this month in Chemical Senses, scientists report that cat taste buds contain the receptors needed to detect umami, which presumably loads to the original study. Maybe take a closer look at that. The savory, deep flavor of various meats, and one of the 5 basic tastes in addition to sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. Indeed, umami appears to be the primary flavor cats seek out. That's no surprise for an obligate carnivore, but the team also found these cat receptors are uniquely tuned to molecules found at high concentrations in tuna, revealing why our feline friends seem to prefer this delicacy to all others. This is an important study that will help us better understand the preferences of our familiar pets, says Yasuka Toda, a molecular biologist at Meiji University, and a leader in studying the evolution of umami taste in mammals and birds. The work could help pet food companies develop healthier diets and more palatable medications for cats, says Toda, who was not involved with the industry study. Cats have a unique palate. They can't taste sugar because they lack a key protein for sensing it. That's probably because there's no sugar in meat, says Scott McGrain, a flavor scientist and research manager for the sensory science team, Waltham Pet Care Science Institute, which is owned by pet food maker Mars Pet Care UK. There's a saying in evolution, he says, if you don't use it, you lose it. Cats also have fewer bitter taste receptors than humans do, a common trait in uber carnivores. But cats must taste something, McGrain reasoned. Now, that something is likely the savory flavor of meat. In humans and many other animals, two genes, TAS1R1 and TAS1R3, encode proteins that join together in taste buds to form a receptor that detects umami. Which, like, yeah, I would totally be able to draw this out again. If I had a tablet, which should be on its way. Previous work had shown that cats express the TAS1R gene in their taste buds, but it was unclear whether they had the other critical puzzle piece. So McGrain and colleagues biopsied the tongue of a 6-year-old male cat that had been euthanized for health reasons, unrelated to the study. Genetic sequencing revealed his taste buds express both the TAS1R1 and TAS1R3 genes. The first time scientists showed that cats have all the molecular machinery needed to detect umami. When the researchers compared the protein sequences encoded by these with those of humans, however, they found a striking difference. Two critical sites that allow the human receptor to bind to glutamic and aspartic acid, the main amino acids that activate umami taste in people, were mutated in cats. So I began thinking, maybe cats can't taste umami, Brain says. To double check, he and his team engineered cells to produce the cat umami receptor on their surface. They then exposed the cells to a variety of amino acids and nucleotides. The cells did not respond to umami. The cells did respond, to umami, but with a twist. In people, the amino acids bind first, and the nucleotides amplify the response. But in cats, the nucleotides activated the receptor, and the amino acids further boosted it, McGrain says. That's the exact opposite of what we see in people. Which, again, I would totally draw this out. In the last part of the experiment, McGrain and colleagues gave 25 cats a taste test. In a series of trials, they presented the felines with 2 bowls of water, each with various combinations of amino acids and nucleotides, or just water alone. The cats showed a strong preference for bowls that contain molecules found in umami-rich foods, suggesting this flavor above all others is the primary motivator for cats. I think umami is as important for cats as sweet is for humans, Toda says. Dogs, she notes, can taste both sweet and umami, which may explain why they're not such fussy eaters. But it wasn't just umami in general cats craved. Felines showed a particular preference for bowls containing histidine and inosine monophosphate compounds, found at particularly high levels in tuna. It was one of the most preferred combinations, Brain says. It really seems to hit that umami sweet spot. That jives with Toda's personal experience. When she was a veterinary student, she got cats with no appetite to eat by sprinkling their food with dried flakes of bonito, a common umami ingredient in Japan and a close relative of tuna. It worked very well, she says. Indeed, one application of the work could be developing foods that are more palatable to cats, McGrain says. He also thinks a spoonful of umami, figuratively speaking, could help feline medications go down easier, and welcome news for anyone who's almost lost a finger trying to kill a cat. Why cats have a hankering for tuna in the first place remains a myth. They evolved in the deserts of the Middle East about 10,000 years ago, where fish of any kind was unlikely to be on the menu. It may have been a taste cats developed over time. As far back as 1500 BCE, cats are depicted eating fish in the art of ancient Egypt, and by the Middle Ages, felines in some Middle Eastern ports were consuming large quantities of fish, including tuna, likely because they were feasting on the scraps left by fishers. In both cases, cats that evolved a taste for fish, and perhaps tuna in particular, may have had an advantage over their comrades, says Fiona Marshall, a zoo archaeologist at Washington University in St. Louis. We're at a starting point. It's not a finished story, McGrain admits, but all of this work is building up to our basic understanding of what it means to cat. And let's see, I want to take a little bit of a closer look at the actual study. Trying to see what exactly they did. Depression, duration. Pretty long and detailed study, which I'm glad that there's this amount uh, of investments in cat research. Oh, Rafa is God, welcome. Uh, Great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Is it fair to say that treatment for Parkinson's is very good currently, or does it have limits on how good it is? Based off of what I can tell, like it's definitely, we've definitely made huge advancements in Parkinson's treatment over the past, past decades. Um, uh, but I would say from what I can tell, the research, the treatment for Parkinson's in terms of like its efficacy is like pretty moderate, where we seem to be pretty good at kind of like slowing down its progression, but at the end of the day, it seems like pretty much like generally speaking, the overall trend is like you just get worse and worse over time, and that we can't really put the brakes on its progression. And that also there's a whole bunch of other issues with Parkinson in terms of like, well, other effects associated with the disease. So pretty much, there's still a huge unmet treatment need for Parkinson's patients, and that like at most we've gotten much better at managing it, but still patients progress, and still patients just get worse over time, and quality of life is greatly more and more affected over time. Well, yeah, I'm curious. Who was it that funded this study? So Mars Pet Care supported the study financially, but yeah, no influence. These were all employees of Mars Pet Care UK. I'm probably gonna have to save this for future content, but this seems pretty cool. Yeah, a study on cats and how do cats taste. Yeah, totally. Where, almost certainly Michael J. Fox has, access to probably like the best available treatments. Because, they likely have the resources to access them. And I have no doubt that they have like a world-class team of medical experts managing all the multiple aspects of his care. And even then, it's pretty clear that he's unfortunately gotten worse over time. And like I'm sure, like even though he's still sort of a little bit in the public spotlight, clearly much less than before. And even then, just like comparing like the early days to like now, it's like yeah, it's pretty clear that there's been this strong progression of his disease, that we're just like, yeah, we're just very limited in our ability to stop. And that is probably just, again, unfortunately, as of right now, on track to get worse and worse over time. So yeah, doesn't surprise me, and totally, hopefully research like this with a blood test, hopefully at some point. So this is preliminary, in development research. Like this is not going to be rolled out, tomorrow or next year as a blood test for humans, because this is in rats or mice, but basically not humans. And there's still a bunch of other technical challenges to overcome. But like if it actually makes it to market and this can actually be used for early screening and diagnosis, that would be a major step in managing the condition. And generally speaking, the earlier that you can diagnose a condition, overall, you'll have better treatment outcomes over the long term, generally speaking. Do you think Michael J. Fox, having had it so long, has... absolutely. I think even here, highlighted in this research, I believe they mentioned specifically Michael J. Fox Foundation, FBI. So, it seems like they recruited from, let's say, a foundation or like a group of patients associated or affiliated with a foundation. And as highlighted here, this work was supported in part by grants from the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's research, and a bunch of other, institutions funded it. I think he was diagnosed around, what was it? Like in his 40s, 50s? Do. Fox started displaying symptoms of early onset. Yeah, so it's specifically early onset. 1991, so he was like, 30. Exactly 30. He was born in 1961. So like, that is absolutely early onset. And I believe that is rare. Or like, that's not the common age for diagnosis of Parkinson's. Probably a diagnosis. But given, usual onset, right here, over 60 years of age. So Michael J. Fox was essentially diagnosed at like half of the age of the usual typical onset. Diagnosed at pretty much 30, or had symptoms of 30. So the condition was likely developing even before that, probably years before that. And then he just displaying symptoms. He just noticed symptoms. And he disclosed in 1991. So it's likely that he was like diagnosed a little bit before that. I don't know how much before that. So that is very early age, which likely, don't know for sure, but likely points to, largely genetically driven. Where like pretty much like almost like destined to have the condition, unfortunately. So on paper, that is one second. Highlight this properly. So on paper, based off of, this proof of principle, it looks like that would be the case. Where that would be one of the primary advantages of this type of test, or like, a blood-based diagnosis or screening test for Parkinson's. Where where it would be pre symptoms or potentially pre symptoms. Don't need this. All right, lots of course. Yeah, exactly. That would be one of the primary advantages. That's usually a challenge for many diseases and conditions, especially ones that are progressive, that could just get worse over time, like Parkinson's, like Alzheimer's disease. Generally speaking, the earlier that you can diagnose it, catch it, then the earlier that you can intervene and prevent, will hopefully slow the unfortunate progression. So I have covered, quite a few instances of, research misconduct or, outright fraudulent or poor quality research. And even just yesterday, I covered, I guess it would be called research retaliation or like academic misconduct retaliation. Where this researcher was, as a result of an investigation, was, exposed to have engaged in research misconduct, or, generating, poor quality or fraudulent research. And it seems like they retaliated by, suing the other researchers that, exposed the misconduct. And, it's great when fraudulent or poor quality research is exposed, because hopefully that improves the quality of research and hopefully improves the confidence that people have in research. But then there's also the issue now of potentially false allegations, so to speak, or how do we kind of carry out investigations into potential research misconduct? And it seems like this is a story of that, of it's a balancing act. We don't want every researcher accusing every other researcher of misconduct, and we want investigations to occur, but then hopefully those investigations occur in a reasonable fashion, that they do what they're supposed to do, while at the same time, not disrupting, what might very well be an innocent victim, so to speak. Gagged and blindsided, how an allegation of research misconduct affected our lab. Bioengineer Ram Sassi, I'm just going to call them Ram, describes the impact of a 4-year investigation by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which ultimately cleared him. Yeah, that is pretty lengthy, 4 years. In May 2019, a phone call to Ram, Sasikaran. Yes, Sasikaran. From a reporter at the Wall Street Journal triggered a chain of events that stalled the bioengineer's research, decimated his laboratory group, and he says left him unable to help find treatments for emerging infectious diseases during a global pandemic. The journalist had rung Sasikaran, who works at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, for his comment on an article in the journal MABS that had been published a few days previously. Almost certainly a journal devoted to antibodies, monoclonal antibodies specifically. Yeah, an open access journal publishing antibody research. Makes sense. Let me back up. The article alleged that Ram and his co authors had an intent to mislead as to the level of originality and significance of the published work. At the time of the article's publication, Ram, who joined MIT's Koch Institute for Integrative Cancer Research in 1996, was running an 18-member lab, and his research on complex polysaccharides had led to more than 190 publications and 50 patents. He had also founded 6 companies, one of which, an antibody discovery company, Vistera, was acquired in 2018 by Japanese pharmaceutical firm Otsuka. The authors of the MABS article were part of the leadership team at antibody discovery firm Adimab in Lebanon, New Hampshire. At first, Ram assumed this was a storm he could weather by providing scientific evidence to refute the allegation, which related to 2 papers he had published with collaborators in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and Cell Host and Microbe. But then MIT received a formal complaint of research misconduct against Ram, triggering an internal investigation that took more than 3 years and only concluded this March when he was exonerated. Misconduct investigations and their outcomes usually remain confidential, but because of the media interest surrounding the publication of the MABS article, MIT took the unusual step of disclosing its findings. In an update, Research Vice President Maria Zuber wrote that the aim of the statement was to bring closure to this matter, quell any remaining rumors or speculation, and assist in fully restoring the reputations of Professor Ram and the members of his lab. Ram says he was completely blindsided by the call from the Wall Street Journal reporter. He asked me to comment on this preprint, and I had no idea what he was talking about. The MABS article focused on Zika and influenza antibodies that had been computationally designed. Because there had been so few successes in this emerging area, the papers by Ram and his team had caught the author's attention, and they wanted to reproduce the finding. The paper said, strikingly, in both cases, the extraordinary accomplishments were not supported by a detailed description of methods or intermediate results, nor were the end products of these efforts, namely the amino acid sequences of the designed antibodies, disclosed, making it impossible to independently reproduce the reported functional characterization. In a rebuttal on his lab website, published once MIT had cleared his name, Ram noted that his original articles had never claimed that the antibodies he designed were based on completely new sequences. He also said that his methods were backed up by subsequent. Furthermore, Ram points out the article questioning his work was published in an entirely different journal and not the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences or Cell Host and Microbe. This, he says, goes against scientific convention, which disagreements are usually conducted in the same journal that published the paper being discussed. Ram's name was mentioned in the reference list of the MABS paper alongside his fellow authors, but the media interest that followed was all about him. Why was I singled out, he asks. Because the MIT investigation was confidential, Ram explains he and his colleagues were effectively gagged for nearly 4 years, despite the public nature of the allegations against him. This is the other absurdity, he says. I had to go through this confidential process. My close faculty colleagues knew what was going on, but others didn't know, and the fact that we didn't respond to the accusations pretty much almost implied guilt. It should have been handled differently when it was so public. We should have had the opportunity to defend ourselves publicly as well, he adds. Although the accusation had a huge impact on him in terms of his reputation, it was even harder for his staff, he says. The lab is like a family. You have undergraduate and graduate students, as well as postdocs. Culture of a group and how we communicate is what makes it vibrant, and it was terrible to see how the lab suffered as a consequence of very public allegations. You get really isolated. You stop being invited to things. There was this dark cloud hanging over us because we just couldn't talk about it openly or defend ourselves. MIT had told his lab members not to talk about the case and to continue to work as usual. However, within 2 years, his team had shrunk from 18 members to just 3. In a letter to the MIT leadership in April 2021, the remaining lab members described how morale was at an all-time low and that their faith in the institution had been shaken as the investigation dragged on. One of the researchers said to me, I just can't live like this. I need to move on. Why should they put their life on hold for this? Says Ram. He gave his laptop to the investigators and carried on teaching. That's what kept me at MIT. the vibrancy of the students, and the positive interactions I had with them, he says. He also did small amounts of research. For example, he analyzed the structure of the Omicron variant of the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 to see which antibodies might work against it, but feels that had his lab been at full capacity, he could have undertaken research that would have had a much greater impact on the pandemic. The strength and expertise of the lab was severely diminished. I helped others and gave advice, but it was not the same as driving the research. When asked if he ever thought about quitting, that he remained positive. I'm somebody who always looks at what I can learn from a situation. That kept me focused rather than being down and depressed, because beyond a certain point, I knew there was not a lot I could do. However, he adds, the pandemic certainly compounded the isolation and dark created by the investigation. It's just not how science is done. You should have dialogue and discourse. You should be able to discuss scientific differences openly, he says. Which, there's definitely an element of truth, a large element of truth to that. Where, where's the line between scientific debate and disagreement versus, scientific misconduct? It seems like there was an accusation of actual misconduct. I don't know that we need to debate per se about fraudulent research, unless it's a false accusation, and then hopefully an investigation, but hopefully a timely investigation exonerates the person. One would hope. This is where it's like tricky, at least in my mind. Like, one would hope that people don't weaponize false accusations to ruin someone's reputation, or to slow their research down, because clearly, at least so far, based off of what we're reading, this had a significant impact on their ability to do further research. And it seems like their lab group shrank significantly, going from I think over 20 to just a small group of people. That's going to affect productivity, and that will in turn affect their ability to secure grant funding, and it could just be this slow spiral downwards, if the investigation doesn't actually conclude in a timely manner. And it seems like that was the case here. Obviously, I have no idea what was done during the investigation, but 4 years seems really excessive. Nature asked MIT why the investigation took so long, what support was offered to the team during and after its investigation, and whether it would be reviewing its procedures in light of the decision. And this is, MIT, a world-renowned academic institution. One would think have the resources, carry out a timely investigation, but apparently not. A spokesperson for MIT did not respond to the specific question, instead referring Nature to the Institute's public statement. What is this public statement? That afterwards. Ram says he is talking to MIT about potential changes to the investigation process, particularly regarding confidentiality and commercial conflicts. He says his ideas have resonated with MIT's leadership, but that discussions are in the early stages. A source close to the MIT investigation, who did not want to be identified, said the process would usually take 7 to 9 months, but that the complex nature of this case slowed it down. Process designed to deal with routine cases of research misconduct could not recognize the commercial motivations at play. Investigating how commercial interests affected the process is warranted. C.K. Gonzalez, research integrity specialist who had no involvement with Ram's case, says that regulations typically recommend a 120-day timescale for misconduct investigations, but that this is rarely met. She adds that many investigations do not have much urgency or sense of priority. When, as in this case, the allegations were public and the lab is at a standstill, this lapse of time is very hard to understand and to find reasonable, says Gonzalez, who is based at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She also says that institutions need to be more transparent. We live in a time when trust in institutions is at an all-time low. Saying, we've got this, trust us, is simply not a sustainable situation. One of the problems for RAM was that there was no set procedure for dealing with non-routine cases. As one of my colleagues said, we have processes to deal with students who cheat in exams, but nothing for this, he adds. Bioengineer Tillman Gerngross at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, who co-authored the MABS paper, says he and his co-authors stand by their article, adding, I strongly encourage you to carefully read the original paper published in MABS. Commercial conflict. Morteza Mahmoudi, a specialist in nanomedicine at Michigan State University in Lansing, who also campaigns against academic bullying, says that when academia and commerce collide, the fallout is rarely positive. It's good that academics have a role in industry, but when money gets involved, there are conflicts. In the past few years, we have been seeing a new pattern of unethical behaviors, where an academic with industrial conflicts gets accused of violating academic ethics, and the accusation gets widely distributed by major news outlets. Even if an academic is later cleared, it is often hard for the person to rebuild the reputation, he notes. He thinks that those making the allegations should also be held accountable to prevent abuse of reporting systems. More than 30 scientists have signed an open letter calling for the MABS article to be retracted in light of the MIT review decision. Janice Reichert, editor-in-chief of MABS, told Nature she was unable to comment on the letter. Ram says he is now mulling how to move forward, with MIT helping him to rebuild the lab. His former colleagues are settled elsewhere, but interest has started to grow. Students have begun to contact him again, and he can see the old magic. In the past, students sought out our lab, and getting a spot was competitive, he says. But he notes the rebuilding is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take months, as we will have to see what excites us and what problems we could work on, he says. He is also hoping to find a way to support people who are facing misconduct allegations. I shudder to think how someone who is not as senior as me could weather a similar situation, he says. While I fully understand how difficult and isolating it is, it's important to focus on the positive. The whole process just needs to be more open. So, it seems like, this was a high impact researcher, which, they're at MIT. Oh, that makes total sense. Yeah, 190 applications, 50 patents, and I think they say, they were involved in, 6 startups. Mentioned something. Startups, let me see. Oh, yes. 6 companies. They're not just startups, but I also founded 6 companies. Let's see. All the more power to them. They can found 6 companies. I wonder if they're all still up and running. But regardless, presumably a highly productive researcher. That output 190 publications. That's a lot. Along with 50 patents. That's an insane amount. And so at least, they have the resources, as they say, to weather the storm of probably almost certainly some early career researcher. I assume, they probably had tenure. And they've been affiliated with MIT for quite a while. I don't think almost certainly you don't get 190 publications and 50 patents within a couple of years. This is probably whatever, 5, 10, 20 years worth of work. And they seem, I don't know, 40s or 50s picture. And so it's yeah, they at least had, a well-established research track record and reputation to fall back on. And so, yeah, they were able to get through it. But almost certainly, it may very well have been a different outcome. If this was some early career researcher, or someone with much less to their name, and they could have just been tarnished into oblivion. and like their career could have like never taken off. And it seems like in this case, uh, as highlighted, false allegation was like weaponized against them for private interests. Like, yeah, uh, hopefully we could have things in place to prevent that. That's where it gets really tricky, where don't we don't want to unnecessarily disincentivize people exposing fraudulent or poor quality research, but we don't want to incentivize false allegations. I don't know where the balance lies. And then probably one of the last things is what I wanted to watch for a while. The creatures that thrive in the Pacific Garbage Patch.
An ocean is referred to as a biological desert. The vast majority of the sea is hundreds or thousands of kilometers from land and is mostly empty water, poor in nutrients, and therefore containing little diversity in life forms. The parts of the sea we know and love, the coral reefs full of schools of colorful fish, or the channels between islands where dolphins and whales and sea turtles all spend time, make up just a tiny percentage of the ocean. For a long time, the only thing we were certain populated the open ocean in huge numbers was something of our own making: plastic. Sometimes these garbage debris fields are so concentrated that they get their own names, like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Garbage vortexes like this are
which, as the title implies, the creatures that thrive in the Pacific Garbage Patch, but they are totally microorganisms. I don't know about in the Pacific Garbage Patch, but they're totally microorganisms that do fun. Nope, not. Although this is more Parkinson's. Funnily enough. Second. Yes. Where, yeah. Pretty much, as they say, plastic waste poses an ecological challenge. And, totally, as I sort of briefly covered before, there are microorganisms out there that can degrade plastic. And I wonder, they should mention the organism. Yeah, although the PHE from the PET assimilating bacterium, Ideonella sacchariensis, or sacchaensis, I guess. But regardless, this is just one of the many avenues that's being explored on ways to deal with, all our plastic waste, or a large portion of our plastic waste. Of like, hopefully, at some point, exploiting the fact that microorganisms can degrade certain plastics, and just like use that to our advantage to hopefully address all the plastics that's now everywhere in our environment, like in the ocean.
Nasty testament to the state of our modern world, and we can't help but think of them with sadness and disgust, and a desire for somebody to scoop it all up. But the way we think about ocean garbage patches may actually be kind of wrong. I know when I first heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, I pictured a dense, singular, floating barge of trash. But really, the metric F-load of trash that's out there is more like a smattering of individual garbage pieces over a large area. And much to everyone's surprise, scientists have discovered that ocean garbage patches are not at all devoid of life. It turns out that an entire class of organisms lives their entire lives among the trash, and in great numbers. And these creatures look nothing like almost any other animal. Forget fins and tails and glittering scales. These jellyfish, snails, barnacles, hydrozoans, and nudibranchs belong to a class of their own, with fantastic and beautiful adaptations to their environment. These floating organisms live on the surface of the water and go wherever the wind and ocean currents take them. They come in dazzling shades of blue and purple, helping them blend into the surface of the water. And each has its own special trick for surviving their unique environment. An environment which is a thin sliver of water and air that's only about 1 meter in thickness. All of these organisms live right alongside the plastic, collected in gyres by the very same forces that sweep our trash into certain parts of the ocean. Which means whenever we try to collect all that trash, we're also inadvertently sweeping away and killing hundreds or even thousands of unique organisms. So, what are we supposed to do? Is there a way to clean up the ocean without killing all of these incredible life forms? Or do we simply just leave all that trash? How important to the health of the overall ocean are these colorful floating creatures? And what other mysteries might they still hold? Even under the calmest conditions, oceans are never completely still. Ocean gyres are a perfect example of this. There are 5 major gyres found across the planet, in the North and South Pacific, North and South Atlantic, and in the Indian Ocean. They're created by the spinning rotation of the planet, the blowing wind, and the placement of land masses. And there are plenty of smaller gyres all over the oceans too. The Sargasso Sea is located in the Atlantic, but has its own ecosystem and own boundaries defined by winds and currents. It's also filled with sargassum, an algae that experiences its entire life on the ocean surface rather than needing to reproduce attached to the sea floor. That algae is a hugely important habitat for numerous species, from sea turtles to eels. But the largest gyre of all is the North Pacific Subtropical Gyre, and it couldn't be more different from the Sargasso Sea. For a long time, it was thought to be largely devoid of life, being so far from the coastline. But in the 1950s, a Soviet research vessel crisscrossed the Pacific, taking samples along the way, and discovered something astonishing. The surface of the ocean was filled with life, creatures that floated and bobbed, letting the wind and waves take them everywhere. These organisms were named neuston, a word that plays on plankton combined with the Greek neustos for swimming. Some neustonic life forms only come to the surface for certain stages of their life cycle, like fish larvae, but obligate neuston spend their whole lives in the thin space between sea and sky. They're moved by the same forces that shape the ocean gyres. But since the 1950s, there's also been a new element added to the mix: plastic. Annual plastic production is close to 400 million metric tons, and each year, several million tons of that plastic enters the ocean. A lot of that trash gets caught around the coastlines or in rivers, but the pieces that do get swept out to the open ocean are usually buoyant and become subject to the same forces that move the neustonic creatures around. Which means that where there are these organisms, there's probably also trash. Yet, trying to study these life forms and figuring out just how much plastic has made it into the gyre is extremely difficult logistically. The Pacific Ocean is enormous, and boats have to travel slowly to collect samples. There's just a lot we don't know yet. What we do know is that these life forms are incredibly strange and unique. One of the most iconic members of the neuston family is the siphonophore Physalia physalis, more commonly known as the Portuguese man-o'-war. They're infamous for their incredibly painful sting, which in rare cases can cause cardiac arrest. Though it may appear similar to a jellyfish, the man-o'-war is actually a colonial hydrozoan. While it looks like a single organism, it's made up of individuals who serve specific purposes and work together as a collective unit. For Physalia, those main units are the pneumatophore, an air sac filled with oxygen and carbon dioxide that acts as a sail, the tentacle polyp used to sting and capture prey, the feeding polyp that digests food, and the reproductive structure. And although it has to rely on the motion of wind and water to transport it from place to place, the Portuguese man-o-war is still a formidable hunter. Its stinging tentacles can extend multiple meters below the sea, and it feasts on fish that swim into those tentacles and get stung to death. But just because it has some good strategies for catching mobile prey doesn't mean Physalia is safe from other predators. In fact, it's the favored food of a species so bizarre it barely looks real, a nudibranch known as the blue sea dragon. Glaucus atlanticus and its relatives might
Never heard of it. Curious. Uh, I'll plug upside down. Ooh, interesting. Oh, it looks like they're super small. I didn't gather that from the picture.
look like harmless and dazzling little sea slugs, but they're actually armed with an incredible weapon, stingers that they steal from the Portuguese man-o-war. Rebecca Helm, an environmental scientist who specializes in neustonic life forms, has had first-hand experience with blue sea dragons and says they need to be handled with care.
In general, on a large scale, they'll eat a tentacle. And within the tentacle, there are special cells that are shaped like eggs that contain the hypodermic needle that the man-o-war uses to deliver venom. So when they eat a tentacle, they have to somehow, right, like dig out these stinging cells, like digging out a cherry pit. And then in their gut, there are branches all the way up to the surface of their skin. And so each little cell gets redirected in their digestive tract up to their skin, unfired still, somehow, and we really have no idea. Because you can fire those tentacles with the briefest touch, and somehow they're able to move them through their digestive tract up to the surface of their skin through these really cool canals, unfired, just waiting there for someone, usually a scientist or a curious person, to touch them, and then that's it.
But the blue sea dragon doesn't have any method of moving itself either. Its ability to float comes from the bubble of air that it swallows and holds in its stomach. Instead of seeking out prey, it has to wait for the ocean currents to bring it in direct contact with the hydrozoan. And then it employs another trick.
They're called serrata, but they look like hands, and they're coming off the side of their body, and they actually use them like little hands to grab things. And it's so neat to see them, interact with their environment and try to catch food, and they truly can't swim. They have no control over where they go and what they do, so they just...
What is their exact size? Yeah, they seem like they're the size of, like, I don't know, penny or quarter. Yeah, quarter.
kind of relax and sit in the sun, and when something bumps into them, it's like they're so fast. Their tail is prehensile, so they can wrap onto things with their tail and sort of hold on to multiple things at once and just kind of eat them one at a time. They're really, really cool.
But the blue sea dragon isn't the only creature that eats Portuguese man-o-wars. So do the violet snails, Janthina, which also can't swim. These snails have to create bubble rafts from their own mucus just to stay afloat, and must be extremely careful when they're consuming prey. If the violet snails eat too much of their prey and don't have a stable raft of bubbles, both prey and predator will sink. The ability to stay afloat and be carried by wind and waves is critical for these strange organisms. Just as the Portuguese man-o-war relies on its pneumatophore to stay on the ocean's surface, A hydrozoan called Velella velella, aka the by-the-wind sailor, has a dorsal fin protruding from its body to help it catch the breeze. But sometimes that little sail can backfire. These organisms are regularly seen on coastlines around the world after mass stranding events. When the wind switches to blowing towards the shore, hundreds and even thousands of these cnidarians can end up on the beach. And the problem might be getting worse for them as water temperature warms, even in winter.
Dangerous as plastic is for many marine species, at the end of the day, the biggest threat to marine life, no matter where you go in the ocean, is our changing climate and the unpredictability of that. And organisms that live at the surface, they're right there. They are the front line for the ocean. Everything that happens in the ocean has to go through the surface of the ocean. And so temperature changes in weather patterns, they're going to experience it before any other creatures in the sea.
And the harm of these man-made problems can be strange and unpredictable. For example, floating plastic doesn't just enter their environment and make a mess. Sometimes it also brings unexpected visitors. Historically, a very small number of organisms could travel large distances over the oceans on driftwood, colonizing new islands or even continents. But it was rare because driftwood decays pretty rapidly. But today, plastic presents an optimal floating surface, and organisms that were previously limited to shorelines are now traveling out to the open ocean and doing well enough that they can reproduce and establish permanent colonies floating out at sea. One major example,
Almost like an invasive species effect, where it's like, yeah, they're sort of like there were these natural barriers that limited the movement of a bunch of organisms. Now that you have all this plastic that pretty much is like there forever, they could just like hitch a ride where they couldn't before.
example of this was when the massive tsunami that hit eastern Japan in 2011 resulted in 4.5 million tons of debris getting washed out to sea almost instantly. By 2017, more than 100,000 pieces of debris from that tsunami had landed in North America, and 381 Japanese coastal species came with it, still alive. These were mainly little invertebrates, things like mussels, arthropods, cnidarians, and bryozoans. So it's not like Japanese macaques were riding the plastic trash all the way from their home to the Hawaiian Islands. But the fact that some of these organisms managed to survive a very long trip over open ocean, and in some cases went through a reproductive cycle in an environment far different from their own, suggests that they may be able to establish new populations at sea. And that could have unexpected consequences. Are they invasive species that will hurt the Neuston? Will they reshape the food webs in unexpected ways? Will they help clean up the plastic by digesting it? Scientists just don't know. It's the same with Neustonic life forms, says Dr. Helm.
So there are some species that seem to do better in the presence of plastic. And for a long time, this really confused me. I knew why. They were laying their eggs on plastic, and they needed something hard to lay their eggs on, and plastic just happened to be it. But I couldn't figure out if this was a new thing and they were having this like amazing boom, or if this was a comeback and they were laying their eggs on something else. But an amazing paper came out a couple years ago that showed the amount of natural debris, things like large pieces of wood that is entering the ocean is a fraction of what it used to be. I mean, it may be down by over 99%. So there.
Wonder if now there's more plastic than wood? Almost certainly, actually, yeah, almost certainly there's more plastic wood in the ocean. Although, like, wood is just, like, kind of a silly question, actually. But still. I wonder if that's, more plastic wood in. I wonder if that's even a legitimate question. Well, don't want to touch that. Uh, 170 trillion. Oh, whatever. Not not even a useful question, but I'm still sort of curious.
They're using this plastic, perhaps in part because there's no longer much wood out there. So it's hard to know if these animals are negatively impacted by plastics, if plastics may be an imperfect and really kind of sad substitute for something that used to be there, or if they're sort of adjusting to something new, or if plastics may be harmful in some ways, and we just don't know.
So this brings up the obvious question. Should we clean it up or not?
Yes, I vote yes. But
This is hard to answer
maintain
in
an
part
open mind.
because we don't even know how much garbage is really out there. It's estimated that by 2050, somewhere between 155 and 265 million metric tons of garbage will have entered the ocean. But at this point in time, scientists have only ever found hundreds of thousands of metric tons in the ocean. That amount accounts for less than 1% of all the plastic ever thought to have entered the ocean. So where is the 99% of the missing plastic? Scientists believe much of it gets degraded into microplastics, which get mixed into the sea floor or make their way into the bodies of ocean organisms. Other trash sinks to the deepest parts of the sea.
Which is like, yeah, that is pretty pretty robust in the literature, at least from what I've seen so far. Of just like at least of the seafood that we, catch and consume is just like riddled with plastic. Because like, yeah, the ocean riddled with microplastics and nanoplastics. Just because like, yeah, the ocean is riddled with that.
Scientists know that the largest concentrations of garbage are found in gyres, but even these concentrations are nothing like what most people picture. The gyres cover a huge area, and the trash is very dispersed, says Dr. Helm.
It's not this floating patch of trash that you can see from space. Nothing like that at all. In fact, if you were on a boat looking out at the garbage patch, it looks like beautiful, pristine ocean. It's only when you look more closely that you realize something's a little bit unusual about this particular spot.
So it's not a singular dense barge of trash, but what is out there can still cause great harm to ocean life. One of the biggest problems are lost or discarded fishing gear called ghost nets that continue to do what they do best, trap and tangle wildlife, like sharks, whales, and turtles that may be passing through. There's also a risk that the degrading plastic will release chemicals into the water and hurt the animals. But any effort to clean up the plastic with huge, scooping nets will also endanger neustonic life, because researchers have found that the highest density of animals is positively correlated with the highest density of plastic debris. And if neustonic species are killed in large numbers, it could have an impact on the turtles, fish, seabirds, and other animals that eat them. Plus, plastic might even be helping some species that lay their eggs on the plastic. So if scooping the plastic out of the ocean is a risk to sea creatures, what do we do instead?
So I have some colleagues that think we should just leave it because it's already in the environment. And they have a good point that when you throw something away, you kind of give up ownership of it, right? I mean, that's the whole point. And if there are other creatures living on it, which is true for almost all plastic in the ocean, there's usually something that's turned it into a home. Who are you to go in and take it back out? I tend to see things as a little bit more about getting the most dangerous forms of plastic out in the safest possible way. So I'm a big fan of efforts to clean up large plastic debris, things like fishing gear that's been lost, which makes up the vast majority of plastic in the North Pacific garbage patch by weight. So these huge fishing nets, they can weigh over a ton.
Pretty disheartening.
And they are designed to catch and kill marine life. And they're designed to stay in the ocean for long periods of time without degrading. And so they're really dangerous to a lot of animals in the ecosystem, and they're actually really effective ways to remove ghost gear that don't involve yet more nets.
Some organizations will give GPS trackers to sailors so that they can tag large pieces of debris when they come across them, And then all those tagged bits of trash can be collected later. Another possibility could be using certain species of bacteria that actually eat and digest plastic. In fact, those bacteria might be one explanation for all the missing plastic in the ocean. Still, we probably shouldn't flood the open ocean with tons of new bacteria in hopes that they'll take care of our garbage. We need to find some way to get all that trash out, but we have to take into consideration which organisms we might be hurting when we do so. It's commendable what initiatives like the Ocean Cleanup Project are trying to do, using huge nets to scoop out tons of plastic from the garbage patch. And they say they're aware of the potential harm to ocean life and that they've adapted their design of its plastic catcher to allow species to swim away. But that's just the problem. Many Neuston can't swim away. And they've started scooping the plastic before studies have shown that there is no impact on the Neuston. Many scientists simply wish for them to slow down and wait for more data to guide any massive cleanup effort. The ocean cleanup's other projects, like the river interceptors, are likely to be much more important in the future of the ocean anyway, preventing much of the trash from flowing out of the most polluting rivers in the first place. Before the development of plastics, Neuston might have been one of the types of life that were least impacted by human activity, because they're just so remote. That's not the case anymore, and we still don't know how fragile their habitats are. The solutions aren't as easy as just collecting the trash, but maybe by studying the creatures who live amongst it, we'll better understand how to help them and clean up our mess at the same time. Our relationship with the ocean is an endlessly complicated one, and while nudibranchs may never be able to take revenge on us for messing with their habitat, some of their ocean brethren already are, as we talked about in our last video. Orcas seem to be letting us know that they are tired of our nonsense by ripping boats apart in the North Atlantic. It feels like our relationship with these creatures, and perhaps all ocean creatures.
Well, I don't know if it's concluded fully that it's because they're fed up, or they just they want us out of the ocean. From what I've only read like 1 or 2 articles, but it seems like it's like largely a learned behavior, where it's like like one orca started engaging in this behavior. It just seems like it spread to other ones, but maybe they are motivated by hostility. Totally possible.
Is reaching a crisis point. But it doesn't have to be this way, and it certainly wasn't always this way. And in fact, at one point in history, in one specific place, orcas and humans weren't at odds with each other, but rather were allies, friends, and even business partners. The orcas of Eden worked alongside humans for decades to hunt baleen whales off the coast of Australia, in the most incredible example ever recorded of orca-human cooperation. The combined forces of the world's top 2 apex predators was insurmountable, and dozens of the world's biggest animals were taken down every year. What could compel 2 apex predators from totally different environments to work together to achieve a common goal? How did they communicate, and how did they each keep up their end of the deal? This story of the orcas of Eden is so incredible that I made another full-length video about it that you can watch now on Nebula. Here's a quick preview.
Always great transition into an advertisement. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good. So actually, I guess it is a valid question, or a legitimate question of like, well, we've dumped a bunch of plastic into the ocean, clearly. And as sort of highlighted by this article, whatever, 170 trillion plastic particles, so like microplastic, nanoplastics, and I guess, big piece of plastic. But then now, I guess it is a valid question of like, well, what do we do about it? Do we actually clean it up? I don't know that ever. Yeah, I'm not sure it actually even ever occurred to me to like question like, well, maybe we just don't clean it up. We just like leave it there. And like clearly, as the video highlights, there are organisms using it. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'll leave it up to the actual experts to decide. But I do err on the side of like cleaning up the ocean, at the very least, to hopefully prevent further damage and destruction to like sea life and like well, the seafloor as well. I guess, you know, that bare minimum that that researcher alluded to, like, yeah, all like the fishing equipment or the fishing nets, that like is clearly, or almost certainly like destroying, like the environment, and like the life around it, like fish and other life getting caught. Uh, and you know, obviously, climate change is also having an effect on the ocean. And I think also part of climate change's effect on the ocean also relates to plastic. Where if I remember correctly, I could be misremembering. I think there's like sort of an effect of like, you know, plastic, and just like, you know, sitting there in the sun, on the ocean, and like modifying it somehow. But I could be totally misremembering. But I guess the actual last thing that I'll cover on the topic of climate change is this paper that was published just today. Although I cannot select this properly, regardless. But it was submitted over a year ago. So again, just another example of, you know, how long a paper can take to, you know, pass peer review and full publication. So this is a paper about wildfire growth risk in California. You know, definitely it seems like, you know, more and more there's this issue of wildfires, particularly in Canada. You know, I think this year, again, if I remember correctly, this is like a record year for wildfires in Canada. Just in terms of like, you know, the amount of like destruction, I think number of wildfires. And I think the season is like still not quite over yet. And from like coast to coast, like in Quebec, it issues with wildfires, and then well, even further east than that, Nova Scotia, and then like BC totally had issues with wildfires as well. And then, you know, that affected the United States with, you know, our clouds of smoke migrating south and like settling on large regions in the United States. I think particularly New York was disproportionately affected, if I remember correctly. So yeah, this paper here, you know, as usual, can you ever attribute, you know, one specific weather event to climate change? Answer is no. That's not even a fair question. And the example that I like to use, you know, trying to, if you suffered, or if you're like overweight, have cardiovascular disease or like heart disease, and you've had a heart attack, well, we know that there are lifestyle factors that, you know, contribute to your risk of heart disease. Like asking, well, you know, what meal caused my heart attack? It probably wasn't, almost certainly wasn't one meal, but it is a confluence of factors over time. And like asking the question, what's the one meal that caused your heart attack? Not a good question. And the same thing I think holds true when it comes to talking about climate change. Where, you know, yeah, you never prove definitively that a weather event was specifically caused by climate change, but you can carry out studies like these, and I've showed similar studies like these of like looking back, and it seems like these are generally sort of computational modeling papers of like, you know, pretty much like inputting parameters, and then like trying to like model the outcomes and know what factors could be affected by climate change, and then trying to, you know, run that alternate timeline sort of simulation of like, oh, this is what we suspect it would look like without climate change, or these variables would look different without climate change, and this is what the variables that we know of in terms of our reality, and then like run these simulations, and then trying to quantitate the differences. I think that's what they did here, but I just did a very quick glance at it. I'm just gonna go over the abstract. California has experienced enhanced extreme wildfire behavior in recent years, leading to substantial loss of life and property. Some portion of the change in wildfire behavior is attributable to anthropogenic climate warming, But formally quantifying this contribution is difficult because of numerous confounding factors and because wildfires are below the grid scale of global climate models. Here we use machine learning to quantify empirical relationships between temperature, as well as the influence of temperature on aridity, and the risk of extreme daily wildfire growth. Over 10,000 acres in California, and find that the influence of temperature on the risk is primarily mediated through its influence on fuel moisture. We use the uncovered relationships to estimate the changes in extreme daily wildfire growth risk under anthropogenic warming by subjecting historical fires from 2003 to 2020 to differing background climatological temperatures and aridity conditions. We find that the influence of anthropogenic warming on the risk of extreme daily wildfire growth varies appreciably on a fire-by-fire and day-by-day basis, depending on whether or not climate warming pushes conditions over certain thresholds of aridity, such as 1.5 kilopascals of vapor pressure deficit and 10% dead fuel moisture. So far, anthropogenic warming has enhanced the aggregate expected frequency of extreme daily wildfire growth by 25%, on average, relative to pre-industrial conditions. And yeah, range of 14 to 36%. But for some fires, there was approximately no change, and for other fires, the enhancement has been as much as 461%. When historical fires are subjected to a range of projected end-of-century conditions, the aggregate expected frequency of extreme daily wildfire growth events increases by 59% under a low SSP1 blah blah scenario, increase of 102 under very relative to. So yeah, well, it seems like the overall conclusion is like, well, he's based off of their modeling, and they use, I think they specifically say machine learning. Like they come to the conclusion that, so like, no surprise, it's varied and nuanced. Some fires clearly affected by climate change, or wildfires made worse by climate change. And then I think they specifically say that there are no there are some instances where yeah, for some fires there was approximately no change. And I'm curious like how they wrap it up. And who is this funded by? If there are any funding notices. Okay. Great. Project partially funded by a contract between San Jose University Research Foundation. Okay. So how do they wrap this up? Like, this is smaller paper. Overall, our results indicate that anthropogenic warming and the influence of warming on aridity, holding all else constant, increases the risk of extreme daily wildfire growth in California. Our findings, however, must be interpreted narrowly as idealized calculations because temperature is only one of the dozens of important variables that influences wildfire behavior. Nonetheless, temperature is the variable in the wildfire behavior triangle that is the most directly related to increasing greenhouse gas concentrations, and in our judgment, there is no expert or model consensus on the magnitude or even the direction of change of many other variables relevant to the projection of wildfire behavior. Despite this, our calculations may result in conservative estimates of changes in risk because at least several important variables that we hold constant, for example, precipitation, wind, absolute humidity, tree mortality, fire season length, and lifetime of fires, may be changing in a way that would exacerbate the enhanced risk caused by warming rather than ameliorate it. More comprehensive assessment of future risk would also account for changes in fuel characteristics, from intentional fuel management, as well as in response to climate change, changes in fire suppression efforts, and changes in ignition patterns. So, they're obviously, understandably, baking in a lot of caveats, which makes sense given the nature of the research, where again they're essentially carrying out sort of an alternate timeline research, where it seems like they held everything constant, and they just, it seems like, they largely manipulated just the temperature of like, well, this is what we think the temperature would look like in the absence of climate change. This is what we know what it is, and then simulating from there. I'm sure they did way more many things than that, and did a way more complicated analysis than that. But it seems like that's what it broadly boils down to. And it seems like, just by changing the temperature alone, they see a pretty significant effect overall. But even then, they speculate. There were other changes. Outcome might be different, maybe even worse. So, take it with a grain of salt. But research like this, I think, is always tricky. And it's like inherently limited, because it's the nature of the research. It is retrospective. You are looking back. So at the end of the day, much every retrospective study, study looking back, cannot establish causation. But I think, studies like this, kind of like looking at or trying to, narrow down specific weather events and see what effects, if any, climate change has, is good. Just as, going to a topic that I think I covered recently. This. The research with the Colorado River, where, as mentioned when I covered it at the time, like there's research going back like decades and decades, I think 30 to 40 years, where researchers were like making predictions of like, the level of the Colorado River is going to be greatly affected by climate change, and we need to start like taking action now. And I think the predictions that they made 30 to 40 years ago essentially like panned out. Where it's like, you see this gradual decrease in the water level, and like it seems like it's come, the rubbers met the road, and it's like, we've got to deal with this now, otherwise, it's going to dry up, and there's going to have a whole bunch of negative consequences. In my mind, this is sort of a little bit of a redemption for science, in terms of, not that I think science needs redeeming, but many people that I think aren't aware, especially when it comes to the climate science, like climate scientists, or like the research of climate change has made predictions, and I think those predictions have held true, generally speaking, or broadly speaking. And I think that this here, with the research in the Colorado River, like I think the predictions that they made like held true. They were quite accurate, and that if we only listened to them at the time when the researchers were flagging this as an issue, they actually took steps to mitigate the decreasing level of the Colorado River, they would be in a much different, or arguably much better position. With that, I'm going to end the stream here. Let's see if I can find someone to raid. Ooh, Kilo the Giant is raid them and set that up, because they are supporter mine, and I think just getting into streaming, so I think it'd be nice to raid them. But yeah, that's it for this stream. I want to thank everyone that passed by. Rafa is God, always a pleasure. Bob Marley, Toffee, thank you so much, always great. Bill Synthetic, thank you, and verbal shout out to you. Witchy, thank you so much for passing by, and the lurk, super appreciated. And anybody else that I forgot, I apologize. I plan to be back tomorrow at roughly the same time, hopefully a little bit earlier. And then, yeah, moving forward, maybe not started. Yeah, hopefully starting next weekend. I plan to pick up the tablet in the next day or two, maybe tomorrow, but I think at worst on Friday. And then maybe I'll have it in time and set up ready for Saturday. But I think worst case scenario starting next week. But yeah, plan to be back tomorrow. And maybe tomorrow I'll incorporate some gaming towards the end. But I still have like a lot more research that I want to cover. But yeah, we're gonna raid into Kilo, gonna set that up. If you're not following Kilo, you should be. They're great. I've been on a number of panels with them. And there's a great and lovely person. And they also support me pretty heavily. And I don't take that for granted and super appreciate it. So yeah, give Kilo a follow. And until next time, take care, be well, be kind.
Can give you as a friend super duper easily.